Hi, everybody. Good evening. Welcome to Evoke Therapy Program's broadcast. I'm Dr. Brad Reedy. Today is Tuesday, August 16th, 2022. For those of you that might be new to this format, you can submit any question or comment. This is a live question and answer. So anything you want me to talk about, you want to address, we start off with the pre-submitted questions. Those are sent in to webinar@evoketherapy.com. You can always send in questions, comments, requests at webinar@evoketherapy.com. So we'll get to those pre-submitted questions first. After we get to the pre-submitted questions, then we will get to the live questions that you might have for this evening. So let's get started. Get right with it. First person to ask the question, my 15-year-old is in his 5th week at Evoke. He simply does not believe in boundaries. He says he can do what he wants when he wants, and we do not have any say at all. This led to poor choices, which led him to be where he is presently. Our question, how to enforce boundaries in a kid who is resistant to them. I know this is going to sound like a simple or a trite answer, but you're doing the right thing. I mean, the idea that there's no such thing as boundaries, it's a nonsensical idea. I mean, I'm preaching to the choir here this evening, but I think the thing that jumps out at me with this question, and I'm guilty of this as much as any parent that I've ever worked with, is that I want to talk my child into the principle. You know, I want to change them from the inside out, convince them of an idea or a principle. Boundaries aren't something you have to philosophically agree with. It doesn't matter if I don't agree with the speed limit. If I get pulled over, there's going to be a consequence that's virtually inescapable. I can continue to resist it, and the consequences pile up. And so for me, I wouldn't pay so much attention. And this is really important. I confessed to this many, many times, and I imagine that many parents can identify with this. I am as easily seduced by a good intellectual conversation as anybody, and I can get lost in the debate and the idea that I'm trying to convince my child of or teach them about. So for you, take a moment and pause and just realize that this is something that he's going to have to learn. Don't try to argue, convince, teach him during this process. Just remain clear about your boundaries. And of course, Evoke will do its thing. One other principle that comes to mind is I remember when I was being asked some years ago in the Bay Area, I was brought in to speak to a group of elementary school age children, their parents specifically. And one of the parents asked me during this process, how do I convince my 8-year-old of the value or the necessity that everybody in the family contribute to chores or housework or that we all work together? And I said to them what I'm saying to you in a sense this evening, which is you don't convince an 8-year-old or a 15-year-old that for that matter. In fact, if you get lost in trying to convince them, you'll stay and get exhausted on that battlefield with them. And so for me, the thing I need to remember, the thing I'm reminding you of for me this evening and for you this evening is that it's just about doing what I do and not worrying about what they believe or don't believe. Staying patient and consistent with the process. And maybe most importantly is stop talking about it. Stop writing about it. Stop talking to him or her or them about it and just start doing it. I've always said to parents, if your child is running around the track, then don't have a discussion about the value of cardiovascular fitness. And you have him now in a place where, again, you have a team of people on hand and a group of peers that are dealing with that on a daily basis. So remove yourself from the idea that you have to convince them of the principle, the idea, and that this is the way that life works, and just settle into the behavior. Children change from the outside in, not from the inside out. And I think the reason I get seduced by it, and a lot of parents do, is that I value ideas and intellectual capacity so much. But part of it is I experience myself as changing from the inside out. I think that if I'm convinced of an idea, a principle, a concept, then I'll change my life. And so because I experience myself that way, I project that onto the child. And frankly, the child isn't even equipped to function the same way that you or I do because of the missing brain development, the brain development that is not present yet in their mind, in their in their body, in their brain. And so you're doing the right thing. You have them in the right place. Be patient with the process. Remove yourself from the dialogue about the concept of boundaries, whether he believes it or not. Give up on trying to convince him and just do the thing. And it's whenever somebody says just be more consistent, that's the oldest parenting advice in the world. And I'm not saying it's about that. I'm just saying change the battlefield from what you're doing at Evoke to what you might be tempted to do, which is to write letters or talk or convince him or her or them of the principle. It is a classic parental challenge for sure. Next question, somebody writes, hi, my question is about aftercare. My daughter left Evoke this past Wednesday. Thank you, Evoke. It was good for her. The letter writing we did was very healing. Her aftercare has letter writing too, but less structured, less supported, and many suggested letters we did at Evoke. How do you suggest we keep the rigor and structure of letter writing without the strong support that Evoke provided? I haven't said this in some time, so I'm going to answer two principles in your question. And the first one is more broad. And that is, when you step down from Evoke, remember this. I don't think it's intuitive to everybody. Evoke is a higher level of clinical care, right? We have more support. Aftercare programs, therapeutic boarding schools are a lower level of care. And so you're stepping down. You have less support. It's in the design of things. So when you think about that drop off after Evoke, it's part of the design. So it's a step towards mainstream life, the way that we're all living our lives. And so it's a normal process to kind of feel that hole or that gap. I'm not saying it's a great process or a fun process or a desirable process, but it's a normal process. It's to be expected. And so when I talk about letter writing, and I think I'll lend it to you now, talk about what you're working on, talk about what's going on at home, reacting to them, writing like it's your journal. When you get updates from them and what's going on. What I love about letter writing, it's probably the most underappreciated aspect of wilderness therapy, because the structure of things is that they're out in the wilderness, and while we can put them on a satellite phone or even do a video conference call at times and have parent visits, the primary mode of communication is letter writing. And what that does is it heightens our awareness. We're more accountable to ourselves for our intentionality, right? You can think about it, you can reflect on it. You can see in black and white what you've written. Whereas if we're just talking naturally and I bring up a point, something that I hear in the exchange between a parent and a child or a couple, a lot of times somebody will say, well, I didn't mean that, or that's not what I exactly said, because we don't have a perfect memory of everything that we say. But when you write it down in black and white, you can reflect on it a little bit more. You can also pause a little bit more. So much of communication can be improved in all of our relationships if we took more time and regulated our dysregulated nervous system. So there's so many advantages to it. The drop off is normal. The decrease in rigor, as you call it, is a normal thing to adjust to. Writing about what's going on from your own life, your own work, the family life, the report that you're getting, or anything you're hearing from them can be really helpful. And writing it like it's a journal to them can be helpful. And I think for me as a therapist, I do this all the time. When I'm working with a client and there's something they want to communicate with a partner or with a child or with a parent for that matter, I will oftentimes say, if you want to write it out and send it to me, I can give you my feedback. Because again, letter writing, emails, even texting, lends itself so much better to feedback and to processing than does oral communication, because it's so temporary. It's just gone the minute we say it. So I hope that helps. Somebody writes, I'm wondering if you can talk about the balance between curiosity and consistency. I know they can coexist in our interactions with our kids, but my spouse and I tend to lean more toward one or the other. He wants to take things more on a case-by-case basis. curiosity. And I want to have clear, agreed upon boundaries and consequences when those boundaries are breached. Consistency. Perhaps we should go for consistency in consequence with curiosity too. Just wondering about your thoughts. P.S. We are gratefully doing our own work while our child is in treatment and getting on the same page as parents. I see it as part of the work. Great question. I think curiosity is about our emotional relationship with the child. It's more about our relationship and how we feel. It's a curiosity is an energy that can lead to the tool of asking questions, non-judgment, being patient, really looking beneath the behavior. Whereas consistency, the thing that you tend to gravitate more towards, is about the behavioral management. And so in a way, I don't think either one of them. I think they're in different spheres of the relationship. So it's not a there's no separation between them. You can be perfectly curious and well, I say perfectly. You can be really curious and you can be really consistent and they don't need to rob each other. Right? You don't need to lower your curiosity to be consistent. The thing that your spouse is requesting, we have a very similar kind of pattern in our family. I tend to want to just do it on a case by case basis, do it from the gut. And I even have a quote today, if we get to it, that I'll share with you that justifies my position in this matter. But my wife wants to know. She's on the front line more so than me on a daily basis of parenting our four children. We have one left at home. And so she has to have answers. And it's a constant process of making decisions about how to respond. And it would be easier for her if there was some template or pattern, even some matrix that she could look at and decide, because she has to make those decisions all throughout the day in real time. But I think for both of you, there's probably a step toward the middle. Somebody told me once, and I love this. Fathers tend, although it's not absolute, but fathers tend to underparent and mothers tend to overparent. And I think that there's value and strength in both of those positions. It can be either gender, it can be the same gender, it can be any gender. But if one parent is more prone toward underparenting and underreacting, and one is more prone to reacting or being reactive or reacting more, there's balance in that. I mean, there's just, I was thinking about this. I did the in-service each week. In our in-service, before the staff go into the field, we do a clinical training, among other things. And the last 2 weeks has been my job to do that. And I thought about it as I left in-service. The staff want the job to be easy and simple. And, like parenting, I can't think of a harder job. But I will tell you this. Well, I'm going to cheat and read to you a quote that I was going to share with you guys tonight if there weren't enough questions, but I think it fits really well. I posted this on my social media last week or a couple of weeks ago. It's by the author James Hollis. I may have even shared it with in the broadcast that I did about his work 2 weeks ago. He said, "Life is not a disease, and a neurosis is not a cancer to be excised." That's interesting, but that's not the part that I really want to point to. He says, "Any seeming resolution today will have to be revised tomorrow, for the psyche is a flowing river, and yesterday's resolution is tomorrow's constriction." So the challenge is that there's no static answer, but there can be a sense of self that gets developed in this process as a parent, mother, father, or parent, that you can operate from that place. The complaint that I get consistently in all of my training, whether it be with parents or with our staff or therapists, is be more practical. Don't be so philosophical. What does it look like? How do you do it? But as I constantly explain, there's no generic technique or solution. The context is too complex. And so like Dr. Hollis just said, I might come up with an idea today, but it will have to be amended tomorrow because the circumstances change. That's the essence of the journey of the heroic parent, right? Which is that you can't really dictate a kind of parenting template or pattern, but you can do the work of who am I? What are my boundaries? What are my values? And in a given moment, can I operate from that place? In other words, this is one of the most common things that I teach, and I hope it's accessible. I hope it's accessible to newer parents. I always worry about that. If this is your first, second, or third week, I hope this is accessible to you too. But part of what I'm trying to teach is there's no way for you to be able to plan ahead and know all the answers because you're going to have to adjust. The minute that you come up with an answer and the circumstances change by a small percentage, by 15%. I finish a phone call with a parent and they feel confident and comfortable and at peace and grounded in their position. They hang up the phone with me or jump off the video call with me, and then they go have a conversation with their child of any age. And all the child has to do is say one thing that I hadn't predicted or that I hadn't entered into the equation, and the parent is thrown off. And so over time, it's about learning where you're coming from. That's why when we make the suggestion for you to go to Al-Anon or Codependence Anonymous or to do your own work, we're trying to develop a sensibility, a sense of self. A strong, clear sense of self is both curious and consistent. And a sense of self isn't necessarily affected by the changing, evolving, ever-flowing circumstances of your life. It's also why it's important to understand that you might be at a meeting where people are talking about their alcoholic spouse, and that may not be your issue. You might be there because of a depressed or an anxious child or a substance-using child. But what you're listening for, again, is not what should I do, which is the thing people want me to answer. Instead, it's what does it mean to be a person in relationship with another person? One of the things I've been thinking about all week, I've experienced it as an adult man, and I think children experience it also. I've been talking about a lot lately. Oftentimes in my work, I'll go through themes. Something will come up that I've read or that I've learned myself, and then I'll see it in a lot of areas. And one of the things that's coming up for me right now is that while I can recognize my faults and my flaws, my defensiveness, my insecurity is more personal and small. I could write to you all of my shortcomings in a broad perspective. I could write a paper on my diagnosis and where it came from, and I could be unfiltered. I could be raw in writing about it. That would not be a problem for me. I say that around my children all the time, and they roll their eyes. But where I get defensive and unsure of myself is just in a given moment. What I'm calling a personal defense or a personal insecurity. So the work is to develop this idea about who you are and then to be that person, to be that human. That's what I said to the staff today. To be human. And I think the most reassuring thing that happens in this process is that the requirement for success isn't for you to be perfect and have it all figured out. In fact, that would be a horrific context for your child to grow up in. What children need to learn is what it means to be human. So the many mistakes that you make throughout the week and the year and the life of your child, that in a sense is neither here nor there. But it gives you an opportunity to be accountable, to apologize without compromising your boundaries. But if you grew up in a home like I did, like most people did, where the thing was to be right or to be on top, and that's where the authority and the power comes from, It's a very, very fragile place to be. But if you can make that transformation to make it the ideal to be human and imperfect and present and ever evolving, you're teaching your children exactly what you all want your children to learn, which is learn from mistakes, stumble when you stumble, pick yourself up. In a sense, you're modeling the de-shaming of a human being. So work on both, learn from each other. Take a step toward the middle in both areas. They are not mutually exclusive of each other. And remember, the goal is to be a self. And the self, the sense of self it can you can relate to it across many different relationships. And it goes back to one last thing I'll say about this question. I've said it before. Sometimes people will be surprised by my many, many mistakes as a parent and my many struggles as a parent and a husband, because I've written a book and because at times I can be very articulate about psychological principles in parenting or coupleship or what have you, communication theory or what have you. And so people can be surprised by what a buffoon I am and can be. How even just lately, like I said, I've been struggling with that personal defensiveness. When my children say, "Dad, you don't take seriously when we share our feelings," or "Dad, you're kind of defensive when we talk about things that you did or didn't do wrong in a given moment." I can tell them I'm not a narcissist, but if I get called out for interrupting them, I get defensive about that. And so people might get surprised by that. But remember, the work at Evoke specifically is about being fallible and leaning into that. So I'm always learning. I have a long way to go. And my approach, the Evoke approach, is not about getting somebody asking the in-service today, they said, is the idea of improving a problem? Because I was teaching about how the goal in life isn't to be good, but rather to be whole, like Carl Jung says, to be imperfect and accepting of one's imperfection. And so somebody asked me, one of the staff said, so is improving kind of the same thing as trying to be good? And my answer was, improving is okay as long as you can look at the whole picture. You know, one of the things I say to parents, I like saying this to you tonight, for all of you. Instead of improving your parenting, let's spend some time understanding why your parenting is flawed. So when a client, parent, or child says to me, I'm going to make that better, I have an anger management problem and I'm going to handle that better this week, that's okay. That's fine. As long as we can also slow it down and be patient and say, where does the rage come from? What's underneath the rage? Where have you felt powerless before? Why in your life have you been ineffective at communicating without rage or raising your voice? Was that something that happened in your family? Do you see how all of those things could be skipped or ignored if the goal is just to improve and get better? We want your children to be able to look at themselves more honestly. But to do that, we have to de-shame and de-guilt this whole process. Those are the enemies, the guilt and the shame. Those are the fuel for resistance. So I will say to you the same thing I said to the staff today, the same thing I say to the students when I'm talking to them. Don't be in such a hurry to get better. Take some time to see why you're stumbling. There may be more value, more depth. There may be a more sustainable, deeper change that happens when you focus on what's going on instead of getting better or being good. This goes for you guys as much as it goes for them. So if you're surprised by how ridiculous I can be as a father and a husband and a person, because I've written a book that can be helpful for you or that you might like, that's the whole point of the book. The whole point of the book is not that I have somehow climbed to the mountaintop as a parent or a husband, and I promise you there are plenty of people in that next room over there who would verify what I'm saying. but rather that I can be in a process that feels human, that I can recover, that I don't get stuck in the defense. And that even when I recognize, like I have recently, about how consistently defensive I can be with the small things, that I can learn something about that. I love the fact that I'm learning about that today after all these years in therapy, and that I know, as I've said many times, I know one of the things I know today that I did not know before is that I'm worse than I thought. But see, that's so much better. When a parent says, I'm a good parent, I might have a couple of flaws here and there, but I'm a good parent, I'm a better parent than my parent, that energy is the defense. That energy will not easily lend itself to listening to feedback, to understanding the other person, to looking at one's mistakes. You can feel in that energy the need to be good. And like I said to the staff, when we surrender or work through or debunk the idea about being good, we are more available to be loved, to love. We are more available to love and to be present with other people. I said to the staff, if I can give you one idea and thought to go out there, and I would give it to you parents tonight, go out there and grapple with that idea that you think you're supposed to be a good staff. Because if you think that's the goal, ironically, paradoxically, if you think the goal is to be a good staff or a good parent, then your interactions with people will serve to prove that that's true. You'll be inclined to gather information and to reject information that threatens that need to be good. But when and if you can surrender the need or the goal to be good, then you can be human. So when somebody challenges you or says that hurt or I'm frustrated, you can listen and ask questions. And none of that needs to sacrifice or rob you of your boundaries. In fact, I would argue that it's really the only it's what leads to healthy boundaries. Because boundaries aren't about being right, boundaries are about being a self. All right. Thank you. Long answer to a simple, straightforward, wonderful question. Somebody writes, Hi, Brad, and everyone else. I'm reminding myself that it is not my business what others think of me, but I had a situation that really tested me. My son got me on video yelling, bitching at him for not getting out of bed until 5 p.m., rummaging through my things and manipulating his dad for $300 for a drug debt. The video resulted in 6 parents showing up at our door and essentially calling my husband complicit in my abuse of my child and that my actions and words have created my son's acting out. I know this is not the case with addiction, but how would you deal with this? My son will not comply with anything and we cannot kick him out. All systems have failed our family. How do I keep fighting? I'm doing my work, trust me, including attending an intensive. Just need an objective point of view. Many thanks for sharing your wisdom and experience. That's a tough one. Don't want to get caught on video, right? I would lean into it. There's really, I was, this is interesting. I think you might find this fascinating, and I think it'll be a nice way to model something for you and make you not feel alone. Some of you have seen, in fact, if I pull it up right now, for those of you that are watching visually, I might be able to, yeah, there it is. Some of you have seen this document that I created called Response to the Other, and it has a list of safe responses and unsafe responses. And one of the things I asked for my staff team was I wanted this. We have a few posters of certain ideas. We have a poem, a quote, and a list of 8 tools in our staff training room. So I asked that this be created into a poster board and put on our wall at the office. And a couple of the staff had some concerns about posting this. And they said, well, are you sure we just don't want to put it in the manual, the staff manual, or maybe just hand it out as a handout to the staff? Because if the students see it, they might use it against us. They might weaponize it. And I had a reaction to that. It reminds me of when parents have been asked to write a letter of accountability about all the mistakes that they've made, that they worry that the child is going to use that against them. And what I taught the staff was that response, that they could use it against you or weaponize you, it reveals an underlying idea or assumption about parenting that is flawed or broken. I've said this before, this document with the safe and the unsafe responses, it's the only self-help document that I have in my house displayed. It's posted on our refrigerator. I want my children to know what a safe person is like. And I do fumble and say the things on the right, and I get called out on it. And sometimes I'm defensive about it, and sometimes I'm not. Sometimes I think it's a distraction from the point that I'm trying to make or the boundary that I'm trying to set. But the authority that you have, if you grew up in a home like mine, like I mentioned earlier, if the authority that you have is based on who's right, you will create a paradigm of endless warring with your children, not just with you in your home, but out in the rest of the world. As they say in Al-Anon, no is a complete sentence. My boundaries are my boundaries. I'm allowed to say no. I'm allowed to say I don't like it. I don't have to justify, which is just a word for arguing for my rightness. So you screwed up and it got caught on tape and your husband got exposed. I think those parents' responses was ridiculous, frankly. Silly. I don't know that I would respond to that very well. I wouldn't do that to anybody, what they did. If I were your friend and I heard about this or saw this, I might talk and ask questions and be curious. I think the way that people responded to you is a problem. But you can set boundaries about substances or him living at your house if he's over 18. I can't remember if you said he was over 18. I don't think you said it. You can set boundaries about that. And I'm not saying it's easy. I'm not saying I could do it without effort. I want to just pause here and remind you, there's no easy solution. There's no simple template. Answers to the questions, what should you do or say, are inadequate moments after I answer them. This work, even when I train therapists, they want it to be easy. They love DBT and CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy. They love EMDR and brain spotting. And I don't deride those things because they're all tools in the toolbox. But they love it because they think that tells them what to do, and then they can be right and good and safe. But what I realized about the kind of work that we do at Evoke, and I said this to them, and I say this to the therapists all the time, the kind of therapy we do here, you can't learn in a book, or it's inadequate to take it from a book. You have to do your own work. So you had a really crappy experience with a bunch of what sounds like very ignorant friends or neighbors or family members, whoever they were. And their approach to you revealed their ignorance, that they don't know how to help support somebody, even if they were right about their opinion, which that's a discussion we could have at length also. The way they dealt with it is nonsensical. But what it can tell you is piling on with your child or confronting your child doesn't work. The research is exhaustive that confrontation is a weak form of facilitating change. If you want a reference for that, the book Motivational Interviewing, which virtually every therapist in practice that I've worked with in the past 26 years knows of the book, has either read it or understands the basic premise of it. That we can become a part of the defensiveness if we present ourselves as a threatening figure. And then what they did to you was silly and ignorant and ineffective, and can be an illustration to you of what not to do to your son. But you can still have boundaries. It might be hard and terrifying, feel like your skin is being torn off when you do it. But you can do it with work as you get grounded in the process. Somebody writes, what are your thoughts about how to speak to our kids if struggling in high school, being proud of them no matter what within the context of the lion and the dragon quote? This is one of those quotes that I've shared. In fact, on my social media, I don't do a lot of reels, but I did a reel on one of on my Instagram talking about this idea. It is so hard being a parent. That's just what I'm caught with. I don't use the word "I'm proud of you." I'm not telling you not to use it. People misunderstand me every time I talk about this, saying that you're not supposed to use it or you shouldn't say that. It just doesn't sit right with me. The way I know to kind of de-shame a child who's experiencing that their performance in a given area is determining their value or their lovability is learning to underreact. In other words, learning to regulate my own nervous system. If I'm responding to my children throughout the day, throughout the months, throughout the years with anger and fear, with rigidness, with shame and frustration, I'm not regulating my nervous system. And I know this. Every single parent who feels those feelings is justified in feeling those feelings. I'm not telling you not to feel them, but you try to work that out somewhere else. I was saying to my therapist last Friday in my weekly session that I have with her, after about 40 minutes, I said, I feel empty in a good way. I feel like I've emptied out all the stuff that I need to empty out for the week. And I'm at peace now. I write. I publish and post on social media to get it out of me. You know, so much of therapy is what you don't say. If the person is not feeling secure, you've got to work with that defense, right? You don't want to just poke right at them and push on their soft spots and then watch them, get more defensive and just say, well, that's just them. That's just gratuitous. You're finding a way to support them to get where they need to go. And it's like driving on a frozen lake on a car. Too much gas, you lose traction. Too much brake, too sharp of a turn one way or the other, you lose traction. So you kind of learn to feel it out. I said to the staff today in a session that I do with a client, I'm trying to get maybe one idea across, if that. Try to listen and understand primarily, principally. That's the goal. But if there's something that I think they're missing or a bit of information that could be helpful, one idea, maybe two. Three is like off the charts. But this work, my own healing, your child's healing, it's the work of a lifetime. And our eagerness or anxiety to push it forward at a higher rate of speed, that's not contributing to the process in a way that will be helpful. So I hope that helps. I don't say I'm proud of you because I think that sounds like it's about me. Pride rests too heavily on the child. So what I try to do, and to be clear, I fail and stumble through this all the time, every day. I'm better than I was 10 years ago, and I hope to be better in 10 years from now. But I try to work on regulating my nervous system, taking care of myself with my support system, so that when I'm interacting with my child, this is important. If I take care of myself over here with my therapist or my support group or my friend or my partner, my co-parent, then when I show up to the child in conversation and in relationship with the child, that interaction is not meant to give me the support. I can be there for them. And the parent-child relationship is not a peer relationship. It is not equal. They do not occupy the same place in my psyche that I occupy in theirs. Period. You will not love, your children will not love you as much as you love them. Period. And that's appropriate and healthy. It's a part of individuating and maturing. Somebody writes, our 17-year-old has done 3 months of wilderness and 9 months at a therapeutic boarding school. We said he could do senior year at home if he could control his disrespectful and volatile behavior. He did for 2 months, but now is starting his old patterns. A semi-recent neuropsych evaluation said he was showing signs of compensatory narcissism. I read this is usually diagnosed after the age of 18. Is that true? Is the diagnosis subjective? How serious is it? Also, do you believe life at a certain point teaches you more than therapy? We have been supporting our son, and he is messaging that he doesn't care. We can send him to another place, but he can walk out at 18. Part 2 below. Our therapist thinks our relationship will be damaged if he is sent again, and that our son will walk out. My husband wants to give him every chance, but I can live with the risk of him leaving home if we set boundaries if he doesn't follow. We would not kick him out of the house. We would set boundaries, and if he can't live with them, he'll be choosing to no longer live at our home at 18. High-level therapy and help was given to our son, and we offer therapy now. But he doesn't think he needs it. I know there's no right answer, but would like to hear your thoughts. Wonderful, wonderful question with so many rich and deep principles in it. Let me bring back up my slides for the evening. Let's walk through this bit by bit. If you've given him a good dose of therapeutic treatment, which it sounds like that you have, it is okay to not do more. You're allowed to do that. There's something in what you said that I think might be helpful for people to hear. You said we would not kick him out of the house, but he would essentially opt out of the house by the boundaries we set. He would be choosing to leave the house. That sounds nice, but that's not the way that it works. I had a client say to me recently, I sent, my child got themselves sent to wilderness. And I say, well, I understand what you're trying to say, but you have to be the heavy. You have to be the bad guy. And when you say things like, you're the one that got you sent here, you have a dog in that fight. There's energy in that statement that it's not your fault. But remember, we have to be responsible for our choices. It's okay to draw a line and say, I can't do this anymore. You can't live here. And if they threaten you with abandonment, you have to face that dragon. You have to face that shadow part of yourself. Remember, all of you, our children, all of our children are going to threaten us with the very thing that we don't want to be. When I meet with a young person and they start saying things to me, I learn really quickly about their parents' unconscious, their parents' what we call shadow, the part of the parent that has been shoved into the unconscious. If it's about being fair or loving or not abandoning or caring or being reasonable, choose your adjective, and the list is a long one. Your child will accuse you of being that to get what they want. And when Carl Jung said that the greatest burden for a child is the unlived life of a parent, this is what he's talking about. You don't get to be good anymore, but you do get to be a self. And being a self is so much better. This story might illustrate it a different way. I was out visiting the young adult groups in Oregon, and I was giving some talk about parenting and how parents dent their children. And in the course of doing it, I was saying, look, your parents have dented you. I've dented my children. And I said, and you will dent your children someday. And one of the young adult women spoke up and she said, yeah, but I'm going to do it. We're going to do it better than our parents. I said, you're probably right. That's often the way that it goes. But that won't matter. I'm clear that I'm doing a lot of things better than my father and mother. Done a lot more work. I've evolved a lot more than they have. I'm much, much more self-aware. I have a ton more skills than they do. Right? I mean, all that's true. But when I say to my child, you should be grateful, because that's the energy, that's the implication. Or you don't have it as bad as I did. That's just me trying to be good again. You don't get to be good. When you accept your badness, for lack of a better word, it's hard to talk about this. When you accept your humanness, your fallibility, and again, that's a lifelong journey. You're free. And you are capable of love. Being good is an ego thing. Being human is a soul thing or a psyche thing. Psyche is the Greek word for soul. Right? It's a psyche thing. It's real. So that's another part of it, is that you would be kicking him out of the house, and it's okay, and you're allowed to. And when he tells you that you're the devil, you have to deal with that. What else is in there? I mean, I think the thing is that you get to decide. Remember, the only thing you can do for your children is to do your own work. The greatest gift that you can give is to do your own work. And if you don't address and heal your trauma and make that the project, you will ask them to carry it for you. That's the deal. Your unresolved issues, they will carry as their burden to take care of you, to make you okay. You have to sort that stuff out. I don't have a strong opinion about if you've given him enough support and therapy at this point, or if another stint would be helpful. Frankly, from what you've written, I don't hear that's not where I would lean. But the fact of the matter is, you get to decide that. And I, or any therapist in the world, doesn't get to tell you. And this therapist that's saying he'll feel abandoned, it's, that's the problem, is that you don't get to win anymore. You get to lose. You get to choose how to lose. So it could be argued, yes, okay, you sending him away will feel abandoned, but it also might be the thing that finally helps him to be accountable. It might be the thing that wakes him up or her up. Therapists don't know your truth. The reason I'm not in the business of giving you advice, and it sounds like most of you who send in questions know that, is because it's silly. Because people who are doing their work don't advise other people. They talk, they listen, they ask questions, they share stories. Go to an Al-Anon meeting. At least during the meeting, nobody's giving advice. After the meeting, watch out. All those codependents will start swirling around. If you've expressed a crisis, they'll probably be triggered. But I've been a therapist for almost 30 years. Been working in Wooler's therapy for 26 years. I don't give advice. Doesn't even make sense. It's actually one of the tools that we teach your children, that we try not to do. We try to teach you not to do. We try to teach them not to do. You give advice to somebody and they follow it, then you're responsible for their life. That's not the way that it works. It is their life. I say to my 14-year-old, although I have boundaries with her, I work on those all the time. Right? For better or for worse, I work on my boundaries. But I say to my daughter, it's not my life. In a few years, you're going to be out of the house. A few years after that, you're going to be on your own financially. I'm going to pass on. And then it will be you. And I don't mean to frighten you or threaten you. It's just that when we understand the nature of psychology, we understand that our children are not our children. As as Khalil Gibran said in The Prophet, your children are not your children. They are the sons and daughters of life's longing for itself. They come through you, but not from you. And though they are with you, yet they belong not to you. You may strive to be like them, but seek not to make them like you. James Hollis said when I was reading his book, he said, parents think that they own their children. And I had some people write to me and say, well, but we have a responsibility. Of course you have a responsibility. You have a responsibility to your neighbor, but they're not yours. You have responsibility to your partner, but they're not yours to own. This is the work. The work is figuring out what it means to individuate, to be a person, and then to be in a relationship with other people. What does that mean? And most of us were taught about control and coercion and guilt and shame as a way of kind of managing things. Fear, intensity. I go to angry. One of the things my wife has been saying, and she's been right in the last week, is the subtle ways that I shame my children and her. And she's right. And I'm working on it. It could be facial expressions, tone of voice, sighs, breathing. And if it's not conscious, I'm acting out on them. You know, James Hollis said, it's really important as parents that we recognize that we are the principal contributors to the neuroses of our children. That statement doesn't hold you prisoner to the fact that you have to pay this debt of guilt and shame. It's supposed to release you, to allow yourself to be imperfect. And when your children say, Mom and Dad, you dented me, you say, yeah, I am sorry. I wasn't up to the job all the time. And you're right. And the implication and the words that you don't say in that exchange, the implication is, what are you going to do about it? How are you going to unravel this? And by the way, if you are so accountable for your child's life, so that you have to carry it like a burden, you can just pass that on to your parents because they did it to you. So this liberation that comes out of our work comes because we learn to forgive ourselves. And when we forgive ourselves, we can more easily hear how we've hurt other people and how we've come up short. When we can't forgive ourselves, we will justify and talk about how good we are. We will make a stand about what a great parent we are and how we've made dramatic improvements over our parents. Last question before I wrap up. Somebody writes, we have 2 sons. Our oldest son is in wilderness currently, week 9 tomorrow, and one at home. They are close in age, but they have never been close. But over the last year, when our older son started behaviors that brought him to wilderness, they became especially at odds. Could you give us some ideas when we integrate our younger son into the Evoke program? He really wants to reconnect with his brother in a healthy way, but we don't know where or when to start. Are there resources we should be finding for him outside of his own therapy and ours? How do siblings begin to reconnect during and after wilderness so it doesn't put one or both at risk? Really great question. I'll give you the big answer, and then I'll get into some specifics and practical. The way that you integrate the other children, the younger children, the children that aren't in wilderness, that aren't the identified patient, is they get integrated into the process by the work that you do, by the change in you. See, this program, while we keep the young folks safe and try to teach them and mentor them, help them to heal and facilitate growth and healing, while we're doing that with them, we're working with you. You're on this broadcast. You're listening to the live episode right now. Hopefully you have your podcast app and you've subscribed to us, so you're getting the updates. If you miss an episode, or you can look back in the 480 or so episodes that are out there. The books that we've read, The Journey of the Heroic Parent, the Audacity to Be You, any of the curriculum that we provide for you, that's for you to start to evolve. And your younger children gets integrated through you, because you're changing, you're shifting. And that shift is like turning a barge, right? It's gradual. You don't turn it on a dime at a 90-degree angle. It turns slowly over time. Sometimes it's imperceptible in a given moment, in a given day, or a given week or month even, because it's so slow. Change is not quick. And the hope and the excitement of this work, folks, doesn't come because it is. The hope and the excitement and the passion of this work is because you know what the project is now. More specifically, you can have them write letters, have them ask questions. It might be nice for them to write. I don't have parents. We don't have parents write an impact letter to the child in the field, but for a sibling, it's appropriate if it applies. I think, once things have stabilized in the wilderness and you've got that initial communication, you've accomplished that in the process. I think opening up to the sibling is perfectly appropriate. Any of the books that your child in the wilderness is reading, the most important thing with the identified patient is they don't want to be the identified patient. They don't want to be the problem. We're trying to teach them that they are a problem, that they are their problem, but they're not the problem. So it'd be nice if the younger child not only wrote and asked questions, but he showed up not knowing, curious, wondering. Don't try to force it. Parents have a lot of energy about trying to manage relationship between siblings. You can have boundaries about certain behaviors, but try not to manage it. That tends to be a barrier. So get them involved in The Knight in Rusty Armor is a great book to look at and to read for any age. Some of these broadcasts, you can have them come on. The next question and answer that I do next week, you can have them come on and ask me questions. But remember, getting too much energy behind the non-identified patient can be re-traumatizing them. If they've been exposed to disruptive, harmful, aggressive, unhealthy behavior because of the identified patient's issues, trying to force them to get into a process can be re-traumatizing because the essence of the trauma is being out of control. So giving them space, again, still having your boundaries, but giving them some space can be a way of healing. I'll say one last thing before I wrap up and before I go on to the upcoming events. I think one of the reasons why wilderness therapy is effective is because of the mentoring component. And I do believe that a lot of young people benefit more from mentoring than they do from psychotherapy. As you know, I'm a huge fan of psychotherapy. It's my career. I've been in it. If you put together all the years that I've been in it, for about 30 years. I'm currently in therapy and have been since 1999 with my current therapist. I'm a fan. But young people oftentimes can be better served by having a mentor or a coach, somebody that takes them surfing or shopping or playing frisbee golf or hanging out when there's not this focus. When I've said this many times, when I was studying play therapy in the beginning of my career, I was so bad at it because I wanted to do talk therapy. And I had to learn, and frankly, I didn't learn it. I did not learn it until years later. Play is the language of children. So when we play games with children, it's not because we're out of ideas. It's not because we're afraid or don't want to talk about things. It's because we're practicing the art of meeting the child where they're at. It's not appropriate to do talk therapy with young children. And as they become teenagers and late teenagers, it becomes more and more appropriate, right, as they go along. But mentoring can be helpful. So ask your Evoke therapist or others if there are mentoring opportunities for various people. The program that we have, the Pursuits program, could be a mentoring experience. We have 3 to 30-day programs for families or adults where we can customize them anywhere in the world. It could be in southern Utah, hiking, canyoneering, whitewater rafting, horseback riding, rappelling, camping and fishing. And the lessons kind of get in there. That's why wilderness therapy is so effective, because the lessons don't always walk themselves through the front door. You're teaching somebody how to make a bowl to a fire, and they're less defensive because they want to make a fire or they can't make a fire. You're not teaching them about responsibility and persistence and stick-to-itiveness and not giving up and frustration tolerance. Try to teach a teenager about that, they're going to throw the baby out with the bathwater. All right, folks. As I mentioned, my 2 books, The Journey of the Heroic Parent and The Audacity to Be You, are available on Amazon and Audible. If you'd like to do a deep dive into your own work, a springboard into your work if you're new, or an acceleration of your work if you're somewhat experienced in therapy, I cannot recommend more. I recommend wholeheartedly, without qualifications, Finding You. We have a September 7th offering, 7th through 11th. We also have an online offering. I believe the next one may be full, but contact intensives at evoketherapy.com to find out more, and our admissions enrollment specialist will contact you. I'm also running a Returning to You. I'll be the host or the facilitator of Returning to You in October 12th through 16th. So if you've been to one, you just want to reconnect to your work, revisit your work, sit with a bunch of people who have been doing some of their work, Returning to You October 12th through 16th. We have support groups for current wilderness families. The next one is August 18th, 6:30 p.m. Mountain Time. Current or alumni families, actually. Once a month, we have an alumni-only meeting. August 23rd is that offering. And we have once a month intensives offering for our intensives alumni. September 13th is that offering. Contact Malia at evoketherapy.com for more information. If you want to coach, think virtual therapy. We have coaches that are educated in the attachment-based model, the Evoke way. Contact coaching at evoketherapy.com. Couples coaching, parent coaching, individual coaching, all are a part of it. We ask all current parents to go to 6 12-step support groups, any combination of Al-Anon, CODA, Families Anonymous, or adult children. You can Google those. They have online offerings if that's easier for you. Also, refugerecovery.org and NAMI.org are great places to go for other support groups and educational classes in your area that are free of cost. All of these broadcasts are available on your favorite podcast app or Spotify. Just search Finding You and Evoke Therapy Podcast and subscribe there and download there. Or you can go to soundcloud.com on your computer or Evoke's YouTube channel and watch the rebroadcast there. If you want to follow me, Evoke Therapy Programs, or me, Dr. Brad Reedy, on Twitter and Instagram, you can use the handles at Evoke Therapy or at Dr. Brad Reedy, respectively. Or the Evoke Intensives program is also on Instagram using the handle at Evoke Therapy Intensives. You can find us on Facebook by searching Evoke Therapy Programs or Evoke Therapy Intensives. And of course, then we have a blog each week that is curated by Malia. Wonderful content each week. Our charitable partners, if you want to give back to people that can't afford treatment or therapy, our partners are ChooseMentalHealth.org, Sky'sTheLimitFund.org, or EvokeFamilyFoundation.org. My next broadcast will be in 2 days. I'll be talking specifically about our intensive programming and distinguishing which might be right for you. Finding You for individuals, finding connection for couples, or finding families. October 18th, 6:30 p.m. Mountain Time. As I love to say to you, thank you for joining me. For and on behalf of the people that love you and that you love, thank you for being willing to do your work. Have a great evening, and I'll talk to you in 2 days. Bye-bye.